At first, Darwin could arrive at no clear explanation to account for the evidence he saw, that populations of plants and animals that were so similar in their basic forms to other closely related populations had somehow developed key differences that appeared uniquely adapted to the place where they lived. He could see why it would be an advantage for a plant or animal to better fit its environment, but he had no clear idea how such changes might occur. In 1838, 2 years after returning from his voyage, Darwin began to read the work of an English clergyman named Thomas Malthus, who had developed a theory about population growth and the struggle for survival. Malthus proposed that if you look at the way most plants and animals produce and develop offspring, they'd quickly cover the world with their offspring if there wasn't some force limiting population growth. What was that force? Malthus proposed that the force limiting population growth is the competition from other plants and animals that must all struggle to find enough food and other resources that allow them to exist. This struggle for existence, Malthus argued, is what keeps the population of plants and animals in balance with the world's limited resources. This idea made Darwin think. If competition for resources keeps populations in check, then in any one generation only a small percentage of the total number of offspring would ever live to adulthood. If that's true, Darwin reasoned, then what determines which individual organisms survive and which don't? His answer? Those that are best adapted to their environment, that have traits that help them function better in that environment, are the ones most likely to survive. And if some of the animals in any given generation of any given population are better adapted to their environment, even if it's just a small advantage, then these are the animals that are most likely to survive long enough to have offspring of their own. And those offspring, to a lesser or greater degree, will also inherit some measure of the traits that helped their parents to survive, so they too are likely to survive, and they too will pass on the traits that helped them survive to their offspring, and so on and so on. In this way, Darwin began to form the core of his radical idea of descent with modification by means of natural selection. Darwin saw that as populations of plants and animals descend through each generation, a species can become modified as advantageous traits spread to more and more offspring in each generation. Finally, Darwin had an explanation for the tremendous variety of different species he had seen on his voyage. It would explain why, when environmental conditions change, some species go extinct and new ones take their place. Darwin reasoned that new species might arise out of the old ones, as new traits were naturally selected that better fit the changed environment, and as those new traits gradually spread through the population. Darwin's idea was similar to Lamarck's in that both men believed plants and animals would pass on traits to their offspring that helped them survive, and the beneficial traits would eventually spread to an entire population. But Lamarck argued the change would come from within individual plants or animals that had somehow managed to transform themselves. Darwin never believed that plants and animals could change themselves from within. His theory of natural selection argued instead that beneficial traits had either been there all along or were new ones that appeared randomly and by chance in each generation. Then, those traits that helped an organism to survive would be naturally selected because the organisms possessing them would live long enough to pass them on, and their offspring would also tend to live long enough to keep passing them on until the traits eventually spread throughout a population. Darwin knew that natural selection explained, in a way that could be supported by scientific evidence, how populations of plants and animals might be modified over time to better match their environment. But Darwin also knew his ideas would challenge the commonly accepted belief that God and God alone could create new forms of life on Earth. So, for the next 20 years, Darwin would carefully test and refine his ideas, but he kept them largely to himself for fear of what might happen if he told the world what he had discovered.